Here at Ncontracts, we've spent over 17 years building tools that help financial organizations manage compliance, risk, and governance. And today, we're introducing something we think changes the game for compliance teams. It's called Nquiry, an AI compliance research tool built specifically for financial institutions. It pulls from more than 400 federal, state, and industry regulatory sources that integrates with your organization's specific context and delivers cited, auditable answers that you can stand behind during an exam. Now, I know that when you hear AI and compliance in the same sentence, you probably have questions. Today, we're here to help you answer those questions. Joining me are two people who have helped build and shape Nquiry from the inside. Stephanie Lyon, who is the Senior Vice President, Financial Services Content. She has advised hundreds of financial institutions on compliance and has a very high bar for what trustworthy compliance guidance looks like. Jamison, our Chief Product Officer, brings more than 20 years of technology experience with a focus on growth and AI integration. Jay led the development of Nquiry, and he'll walk us through what makes it different from general purpose AI tools. Let's get into it. Every compliance officer at a financial institution is trying to stay current in a regulatory environment that does not slow down. Today, we're talking about what that costs teams in terms of time, risk, and missed calls, and how Nquiry was built to change that. Stephanie and Jay, let's get into this. Stephanie, I'll start with you. Start us at the ground level. What does a research burden actually look like for a lean compliance team? Not in the abstract, but in day to day.
Day to day, compliance officers are fielding regulatory questions almost every single day, especially questions that stop a business unit from being able to do their jobs. I remember sitting on the chair and being asked to review a power of attorney that just came in for one of our client and customer accounts. And I needed to tell them right away if that POA was performing everything that our internal process required, state laws, federal laws. So that's just one example. There are numerous other things that show up at my desk, like having to review marketing advertisements. And Rafael, just to tell you, what does the research burden look for someone at a lean team? I just got back from a compliance conference, and I remember one of the senior compliance leaders that spent most of her day outside of the conference because she kept getting bombarded with questions that, again, were stopping people from being able to make a decision. And she was really, in fact, not inside the institution in that conference learning what she wanted to be learning. She was being used as a compliance encyclopedia that's real time. And that is really unfortunate. And that is the reality most of us face when we are a team of one or two people.
It's a constant game of whack-a-mole is what you're describing. You really don't have a chance to plan. You're always just responding and quickly. When compliance officers are evaluating tools that promise to help with that burden, what does the expert validated have to mean before you trust it? And what's that bar?
The bar is very, very high. And honestly, it should be. Compliance officers are naturally skeptic, and that skepticism really serves us well in this role. But when it comes to trusting anyone that's going to give you a compliance answer, I don't care if it's a person, a system, AI, there are really three things I need to establish that trust. The first one, show me the citations. Tell me exactly where I can find that regulatory language that you're using to give me advice. Number two, tell me and show me that it's current. Laws and regulations, you and I know, they change every other day. And I need to know that you know that too, that you're able to keep up to date with that information, because any change could change your interpretation and my ability to give the best advice. And number three, show me your reasoning. I am naturally curious and skeptic, like I mentioned. And if I don't understand how you arrived to that conclusion, first of all, I've learned something in my role, and that is reasonable minds do disagree often. And so I need to understand exactly how you got to that answer. So I consider for my fellow attorneys and compliance officers out there, those are the things at a minimum we need to know to build some trust and assurance that we're getting good information.
You sound like you were trained by a good examiner or a good person that was used to dealing with examiner questions.
That's right.
So um, there's a real and meaningful difference between legal advice and compliance guidance. Nquiry isn't a lawyer. How do you think about where that line sits and why does it matter to the institution using it?
Yeah, a lot of general purpose LLMs right now are actually in the middle of litigating that exact question because they are providing professional, legal, and medical advice that they are not qualified to provide. That is why I went to school. That is why I am barred and I have a license, right? And we know that general purpose LLMs can give you really great information, but sometimes it's that nuance, that expertly trained eye that you need to verify something that's going to be high stakes and that could change the entire trajectory and strategic approach to how you're going to implement the advice, right? And so I am currently watching the state of New York make a decision specifically on a chatbot providing legal advice to someone who filed that case just to find out that the case law didn't exist. And we're seeing penalties start to increase tremendously. Back in 2, 3 years ago, when these chatbots came out, people were using them. They were not verifying the information. Remember, compliance, trust, but verify. They weren't doing that. And they were getting slapped in the hand with $5,000 penalties for making up case law. Now they're starting to go up $20,000, $30,000 because the courts want people to understand the second you're utilizing these general purpose LLMs or chatbots to do professional services, you better get it right or it's going to get more painful.
There was a recent case that, or about a year ago, that was addressed in the American Banker, and that I often use as an example. But the bottom line came down to the chatbot was not correct. It was not following. It represented the organization, even though their policies and procedures were different. Nobody had validated that chatbot was giving out correct answers all the time. So again, I think that's a real key point there. So when a compliance officer acts on guidance from an AI tool and something goes wrong, where does that liability sit? And how should the people be thinking about that?
You and I know, Rafael, generally speaking, regulators don't care whether you use the third party to create efficiencies or create better access to technology. They see the ultimate responsibility with your financial institution. Third party relationships have always been the cause of a lot of enforcement actions, especially when you're not managing them well. And regulators view non-compliance by your vendor as non-compliance by your institution. I mean, I don't have to rattle all the different examples that we have seen in the marketplace, right? So for that reason, picking the right tool, picking the right partner is really table stakes when it comes to highly regulated institutions. You need a partner who really understands our environment that is highly regulated. They need to understand AI, not just be talking about it and hoping for the best. And you need someone who's going to verify its accuracy today, tomorrow, and 5 years when this is no longer that new and exciting technology, that they're going to continue to maintain it forever for your institution to continue to be able to trust. Because again, we don't want to be wrong. And we want to know that we don't have to just check every single tiny little detail that is provided to us by our technology partners, because otherwise, really, where's the efficiency and time savings if you can't trust some of that information that is being given to you?
Right. So Jay, I'd like you to walk us through the kind of architectural design that separates Nquiry from a compliance officer just taking their question to ChatGPT. What's the difference?
Oh yeah, sure. Absolutely. Well, first of all, it's great to see you again, and thank you so much for giving us the chance to meet up with you today. Um, I think at the highest level, the way we think about it is these new technologies like ChatGPT, like Claude, like these others are fantastically powerful and interesting tools. But what we bring to the table that's unique and different is really focus and focus on giving that compliance officer what she or he needs, which is real assurance that the answer that they're getting is really designed to be something that is trustworthy, that is authoritative, and that is something that we can stand by, that they can stand behind. And we deliver that a number of different ways, which I'd like to talk about, because that really calls out what's different about Nquiry from Ncontracts versus these other tools. First of all, the knowledge base is different. With the broad scale LLMs, they're looking at the entire internet, everything that's out there. And we are standing on the shoulders of that LLM technology, but we are focusing the stream on 400 plus federal, state, and industry sources maintained by regulatory experts. This includes OCC, FDIC, CFPB, Fannie, Freddie, Ginnie Mae, state banking departments, security commissions, attorney generals, and more. So whereas a consumer grade LLM like ChatGPT is going to pull from the internet, and it's a great tool, Nquiry is sort of going much deeper because it is pulling from a purpose-built regulatory intelligence library that we build and maintain for the latest. That's also informed by 17 years of our focused work with thousands of compliance professionals across our customer base. That's really, really important just in terms of what information our technology is looking at relative to the others. The second is we integrate with the product nComply. And that's huge because Nquiry can answer questions not only against all the regulations that I talked about, but actually against your policies. So if a CEO or a risk officer asks you as a compliance professional, hey, does our policy align with this reg? Now you can get a sourced answer. You can't get that from ChatGPT. There's no awareness of your institution. We can provide that. The third thing that we do is, again, because we are so deeply focused in Ncontracts on building tools and solutions to drive compliance in the financial industry, that we've built and designed this so that the responses come back with the citations to the authoritative sources. And Steph discussed that and how important that was in her section. And we think that's important because then the officer receiving the answer can verify it. There's a full audit trail from question to question. That gives you, so the way to think of it is you get your question in, you get the answer, and all that information is just dropped in and ready to go for exam readiness. So that's really about building workflow into this solution, not just providing a chatbot. And then I'd say beyond the technology, I think the other thing that we have deep mindfulness around at Ncontracts is we understand how important it is as industry leaders in the financial industry to stand behind your answers. So we are doing a couple of things that are very important. One of them is we have a guarantee. If the answer that you get is incorrect, you can come to us and we'll work to make it right in terms of monetary guarantees. And then the second is really around ensuring that we provide an opportunity for you to connect with compliance professionals as needed to verify the answers or provide even further clarity. Again, if you get an answer from any of the LLMs and you want further clarity, there's no one to call at ChatGPT to discuss that further. And I think those are some of the areas that we look at that really we think help us stand on the shoulders of this amazing technology to deliver a form-fitted solution that really meets the needs of today's overburdened compliance officer in the banking and financial industry.
Jay, you just touched on a really important aspect of being able to chat with somebody. I just had the experience in filling out my taxes and using TurboTax, and the answers were given to me in AI, but I still needed an expert to talk about, in the context. So that really leads into my next question, and I think it's great that we're going to be doing that. Nquiry is tailored towards an institution's charter type, the operating states, internal policies, that context. How does the product know that context, and how does it put it to work?
Great question. And this directly flows from our product vision at Ncontracts around building an integrated platform of solutions and tools for compliance, risk, and governance in today's financial industry, institutions, financial services companies, and whatnot. In this specific case, we have a product called nComply. It is our compliance offering. And in that product, clients set that up. And when they do so, to get the real value from it, they're configuring their charter type. Are they a bank, a credit union, a thrift, a broker-dealer, et cetera? And that they then also fill out kind of like TurboTax, to use your thing. What products do they offer? What services are they providing? What states do they operate under? Any applicable regulatory bodies we capture in that questionnaire. And when that is codified, when the client says, yep, that represents who I am, then nComply basically can provide a really clear set of, these are the rules and regulations and the guidelines that you need to follow. Here are sample policies, or you can write your own policies if you want. But we now have a place where we're putting all that information in one place, and we are keeping it updated because, as Steph points out, and as you know, the regulatory state and environment that the client must comport to is constantly evolving, and our job is to keep that up to date. So that is exactly how we put into place this base of very important but dynamic information. And it is that we think provides Nquiry a great ability to go into any individual client and provide them the right kind of regulatory and compliance advice on their questions based on having access to that really specific information that a new compliance professional may not even know, as she or he is asking questions to ChatGPT, all the different regulations they should be asking about, which is another reason that the integration with nComply is so important and so valuable for today's compliance professionals.
Well, again, that context does matter. But one of the other key areas we hear a lot about in AI are hallucination. And that word makes compliance officers really nervous about AI, and for good reason. How did you design around that risk, and what does confidence scoring mean in practice?
Yeah, great question. So hallucination certainly is a concern that everyone should be worried about, whether they're particularly in compliance officers in the financial industry and with banks and credit unions and whatnot. And they should be asking about this with any AI tool or any vendor talking about AI in their roadmap. We took it very seriously from day one, and it led us to a very rigorous approach, not only in terms of how we built the product, but how we test it and how we continue to keep our approach to engineering this product daily. So first, let me talk about how we build it. Nquiry only answers questions that are pulling from our curated regulatory library. So they're not coming from the open internet. So if you come to it and say, I'm going to ask a compliance question, then I want to know where I want to go to dinner, Nquiry will not tell you where to go to dinner. It does not answer that question. This dramatically reduces our hallucination risk because the model isn't improvising. It is grounding every answer in a verified source material. It's providing those citations, or it's not providing an answer. Second, the reasoning and the rationale, every response is built. We engineer it to include an indicator of how the system justified the answer. That is kind of the logic tree of how did you get through this. If the system isn't confident, it's going to tell you the limitations of the response. It's not going to guess and say, well, I got this far and I'm just going to phone in the rest. And then what we do is we have a thing that we call the golden data set. This is a set of data that we're looking at. Steph and her team maintain it, run it. They're evaluating it all the time. And they've got very rigorous standards where they're running questions against this constantly. And they're looking at, as the core AI technologies that we're building on top of are evolving, we have to make sure that it doesn't drift. So they are keeping track of, look, how do we make this stronger? Where is it drifting? Where are things getting better? So that we have great internal views of how to ensure that we're delivering really high quality and ever increasing quality of answers to our clients. And then the third thing is something that is unique to us. We're the first and only to do this, and we're very proud of it because we think it reinforces our market leadership at Ncontracts in this industry. Is we stand behind it. We are, we built, as I said, guarantee structures, which we'll be talking about more as we bring this to market, that are around accuracy of our product with our clients. And we are providing a compliance concierge offering, which enables that automated escalation to a compliance professional, not just some human somewhere, but it's a US based licensed compliance professional with expertise, so that the client is able to say, look, I asked this question. I tried to rigorously understand some details. I'd like some further clarification so that I know I can stand behind it. And I think that's a great representation of how we're trying to look at these tools that are so powerful and have so much potential in the world of AI, and leverage them and compose them into a solution that is really a great fit for the customers that we spend our time, and we spent decades building delightful and valuable and impactful solutions for.
I love that word, delightful. It's what we strive to do, and I really, truly believe we live it. And I want to add to your response, Jay, that it's not just hallucinations we should be really concerned about. I've been working with these chatbots over and over again now for a few years, and something I've noticed is the regulatory nuance. It is often missed. You have to remember, regulators love writing as if they're in the middle of a treasure hunt. They're going to give you the answer, and then they're going to hide in the commentary all the 15 ways in which the answer doesn't apply, changes, or should be modified. And chatbots are not trained to understand the level of nuance. So many of these authoritative answers that these chatbots are providing, they might not be hallucinating and wrong. They just simply stopped. They stopped the second they thought they found an answer, and they're not going any further for you. So if you're not working with someone who understands that level of nuance, then you're not going to be able to rely fully on those answers. And that's why I also want to ask you, Rafael, as someone who has spent years on the other side of the examination table at the OCC, if an institution is all of a sudden coming in that you're examining and they're using AI to support their compliance functions, their compliance guidance, what would you want to see in their documentation? And what would concern you if you don't see?
It's a great question, Stephanie, and some of that really came apart and you addressed in your answer, and I'll address here. What I want to see is really straightforward, because it's the same standard we applied to AI before AI existed. The tool changed, but the expectation that I have doesn't. First, show me the question and the output, not a summary, the actual response. If you used a tool to inform your compliance decision, that output is part of that decision record. I would like to be able to see where you got that. I've often seen that with institutions. We talk to an attorney. Here's what we got as an opinion. I talked to this other compliancer. Here are the emails that I got. So we can begin to pull together a full picture. Second, especially with AI, show me the human in the review. The AI cannot answer and cannot be the last step. I want to see that a qualified compliance officer, and Jay, you just touched on that, with the years of experience that they have and applied their judgment to make a call. The tool said X. As I reviewed it, and here's what we did, the AI said so, are not answers that I would take. You need to be able to kind of show me the money when it gets down to it. And third, show me the sourcing. If the tool cited Reg Z or an OCC supervisory letter or a supervisory letter from the Fed or FDIC, I'm going to verify that citation is real and current. Examiners do this. If the source doesn't exist or if the guidance is outdated, and that's key because many times they forget that guidance is outdated, that's a problem. And it's your problem, not the vendors. And fourth, that decision log. As you kind of talked about through here, all of this, what did you do with the guidance and why? If the tool pointed one direction and you want another, that's fine. Document your reasoning. This is not a red flag. That's judgment. And that's exactly what I want to see. Every institution is a little different. Their risk tolerance is different. And as you touched on, their policies and procedures are different. So to be able to go from there, the AI may give you an answer, but our risk tolerance and our expectations are much higher. So how does that answer then align with what has already been philosophically established by the board of directors? What would concern me is if an institution cannot reconstruct the basis for that compliance decision. I can't remember who made it. And that sometimes happens. There's turnover, but it starts the process all over. And I know as an examiner going in and there's a new compliance officer and they're not using any tools, I do look at that a lot more thoroughly to really understand that this compliance officer understand that context. So AI doesn't lower the documentation standard. A good tool raises your ability to meet it faster and with a better sourcing and with a cleaner audit trail than a sticky note and a post-it note on your laptop.
Yeah, I think those are really great points. And I also think that AI is here to stay. So I am curious in this ever evolving regulatory landscape where things are only getting more and more complicated since Dodd-Frank. We thought we were at the height of it until last year. We realized there's so much more to uncover when it comes to regulatory change in regulation and deregulation and redelegation, which is what I'm calling this. Rafael, what do you think is the role of AI when it comes to making the job of a regulatory compliance officer or risk manager a little bit more manageable in this landscape?
I've given this a lot of thought, and I think really there's two versions of AI that we're dealing with in compliance right now, and they produce different outcomes. The first version reduces uncertainty. It closes that information gap. It gives me some information. The hours a lean team spends trying to track down that information, whether a state bulletin change or a new final rule affects their product line, or whether the disclosure language is correct that they put there. When the gap closes, it helps to make that institution faster and better informed. That's genuine risk reduction. The second version creates uncertainty, as we're talking about here. How do we reduce that uncertainty? It happens when institutions treat AI output as a substitute for judgment, as I talked about earlier. When that output isn't sourced, when no one documented who reviewed it and why they act on it. That's the compliance world we live in. And in an examination, it shows. What I've also seen here is, again, that the policies and procedure matters that I just talked about. The risk appetite for that institution matters. But most importantly, we're seeing that right now, the regulatory environment is genuinely unsettled. Agencies are recalibrating. Enforcement priorities are shifting. And in that environment, the premium is on defensibility and not just getting the right answer, but being able to show how you got that answer. So my thought is, before you ask whether AI is a right for your compliance program, ask whether the tool knows enough about your institution to give you advice that is actually yours, that you can own. Sourcing matters, version history matters, but context around your policies and procedures and your risk appetite, your charter type, that is what really helps to turn a research tool into a compliance tool. So I appreciate that. So for any compliance officer listening today who's been on the fence about AI, not a skeptic, just cautious, Stephanie and Jay, I'll ask each of you this. What one thing would you want them to take away from this conversation?
Rafael, I would say caution is what has made you great at your job. So the question isn't necessarily whether you should be trusting AI. In my opinion, the question you should be asking is, can you trust the tool that you're evaluating? Does it show you the citation? Is the tool current? Can you see the reasoning? If the answer to these three questions is not a resounding yes, then that's a problem, because you want to make sure that you are managing a risk, not just accepting one.
Jay, any different insights? Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Steph said that extremely well. I would basically ditto it and just say these tools have tremendous potential, and they are helping all of us accelerate the productivity that we have in whatever job that we might be undertaking. But with a compliance officer, the role that you have in your organization is so important in terms of keeping the organization safe, to keep it on the straight and narrow. And in that context, it is very important to say, how do I balance this ability to get the tremendous productivity gains and the insight so that I can provide those answers in real time and help our business move forward faster and more effectively with our clients and achieve our business goals. But I have to do it in a way that makes me safe. I've got to be able to do it in a way that is well informed and is documented and auditable. I need to be able to stand behind this because the stakes are super high. And so I think what we've really endeavored to do with our inquiry offering, what we've strived to really deliver, is that best of both worlds of the speed and the power of AI with the safety and the authority and the trust that comes with a company that's been focused here for well over a decade, just laser focused on giving clients answers that they can stand behind with rigor. And so I think that that's what we've endeavored to do. And I think it's a really nice kind of philosophical approach around how I'd advise folks in this role and in this function in their organizations to approach AI, which is how do I go fast safely, or how do I get safety fast, is kind of my quick gist on what it is that I think is important and what we aspire to deliver.
One other part that I would actually suggest to compliance officers is keep track of these questions you're asking, because the questions are going to continue to develop and change. Just like the questions we ask after we see an enforcement action at another institution. Hey, does this impact me? Do I really need to understand that? We learn about additional questions. But as you're starting down this process and you are maybe skeptical and you are cautious, think about those questions and document that question. That really helps to serve you as a living library. So thank you, Jay and Stephanie, for this great foundational knowledge. Compliance teams are already making decisions under time pressure with incomplete information. The question isn't whether AI changes that equation, it's whether you're in control of how it does. So thank you to Stephanie and Jay for genuinely providing to this useful conversation. If you're evaluating AI for compliance work or just trying to make the case internally, I hope you gave something concrete we gave you something concrete that you can take back. So as I always say, as I end these Ncasts, stay proactive and stay engaged.